Good evening, everyone, and thank you for visiting myself on another episode of Spanning the Need. I'm your host, Anthony Spano. Tonight, we're going to talk about something different, something that pretty much pertains to what we're dealing with right now in government and a lot of different stuff and rules and regulations at the Senate level and some others. And we're also going to talk about a book that will show how our framers really used Christianity as a framework for the Constitution. And tonight we're going to talk with author Jim Tonty. How are you, Jim?
Fine, Anthony. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good. And we'll get into talking about your book, Constitutional Law, here shortly. But and how you use that to create your book. Talk a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, well, I always had a love for history, American history especially. So in law school, I was writing my thesis on constitutional law. And of course, as all law schools, all good law schools, they teach you about, the Constitution, the articles, the states' rights. First of all, of course, legislation, states' rights, the executive branch, and it goes into other details on acting under the Constitution for the states, for the government, and for the president. But I really wanted to take it further than that because we never really got to the founding fathers. How was it really established? What was the pretense of them writing this great article of government? And so, doing my thesis, I went back and researched from the very start, actually back to Columbus. So in 1492, as he came over to this country, what was his intent? What was he trying to do? And by the way, how was he going to govern his colony when he got here? Now, of course, it was a small colony at first, but certainly, he had rights and regulations and so forth that he was instilling. And one of the areas that I was intrigued about is that not only did he come here to discover new land for Spain, and of course the King of Spain, but he also had some underlying beliefs that he wanted freedom of religion. He wanted to portray Christ the way he wanted to, the way he biblically knew that he should, and not as Spain under strictly their Catholic or religious beliefs. And because of that, he wanted that freedom. And so even in his writings over time as he was sailing, and of course he had many perils to overcome, he went to prayer. And his prayers are pretty powerful. And you could see that he was a pretty good Christian. He was asking God for his help in not only discovering this land, but to save his crew. So it was pretty interesting. And then, of course, San Salvador, I'm sure you've heard about that and how he named that. And then, of course, how he felt about Christianity in the new land. So that was a beginning of it. That was kind of the start of the colonies coming over. Now, of course, there was 15 other voyages and, thousands of other Spaniards and others that came over on other trips. And we'll talk about that later on. But the basis was that I was a little bit surprised to learn that even from, discovery of this land, there were some biblical truths behind it, some biblical intent behind it. So that was interesting. Then when I got to starting to research the Constitution, and okay, so where did these founding fathers get their writings from? What were they trying to portray in leading this country? And so, if you're familiar with the Magna Carta, and I think that's a lot of history books in high school and college talk about the Magna Carta and how that was really the first rule of law from Britain to us, English law, that gave us the writ of habeas corpus, which means that, hey, the citizens had rights before they could be prosecuted. And so that process. Absolutely. Due process was part of that. Yes. And so they started with the basis, the founding fathers, with kind of habeas corpus. And so that was interesting to find out that, hey, some of our charters did come from, England, and Magna Carta being one of them. So that was interesting. Then going into the founding fathers themselves, boy, it was really enlightening to see that a lot of their writings, a lot of their charters, the first charters, and by the way, I went through all 13 colonies. I wanted to research every state colony and what they represented. How did they govern their first colonies? What was their rule of law? So I researched their charters. Every one of their charters, some stronger than others, but every one of their charters have a biblical aspect to it for governing. Some of them quoted the Ten Commandments, the governing law of the Bible. I mean, it went on and on to each charter. And by the way, I reference a lot of that in the book. So everything is based on facts and research. Of course, being a law student, I certainly had to make sure that I had the facts and not my own opinion based on this thesis. So,
I think that needs to be a point that we pride ourselves on, is because nowadays people talk about misinformation and fact checking, and I think this brings a good perspective. Is that this is for your thesis? This is law school. They want you to cite references. They want you to do your homework, if like anyone would say.
Absolutely. And I even go into case studies and so forth in this book, so that it backs up the principles of the law that I'm quoting in some of this. But going back to the founders, I found that really interesting, because I have heard and said, hey, they weren't really believers. They really weren't Christians. They believed in God, but they really didn't practice it. And I found that to be an absolute lie, that every single one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, not all of them had the same belief as far as strength in the Bible, but they all had a belief in God. And they all proclaimed that belief, not only in their charters as the states, pulled together to form, the first Constitution, but also the intent of how they were going to govern this new country. And
it's interesting. It's interesting you say that, because a lot of people talk about not to mix religion with politics.
Oh, yes. I hear that all the time, Anthony. And I addressed that in one of the chapters quite extensively, because the Establishment Clause is really misunderstood. In fact, it's quoted even by some theological and law professors incorrectly. They take one case or so and some Supreme Court decision, and they run with it. And if you go back to the early Supreme Court decisions, the early founding fathers, they'll find that really isn't their intent at all. And they kind of rely on Jefferson. And I'm jumping around a little bit, but I hope you don't mind.
No, that's fine.
But even Jefferson, that they use as their defense for saying that we're not a biblical nation, because he said we're building a wall of separation, and that wall can't be penetrated. And there is no such thing as a wall of separation in our Constitution. There is not. And that really irks me, because for many years I believed that myself, and erroneously. So until you really do the research, I hate to say it, but some of the professors and the beliefs out there are incorrect. So let me explain a little more on that, and then I'll go back to the founding fathers and their intent.
Well, let's show your book. Your book is Constitutional Law, talking about a bibliography perspective with that in the Constitution on how it was created, with what you just defined with the Jefferson and all that. So I just thought people, here's a look at it. You can get it at any store, Amazon, or anything like that. But I wanted to give people an idea of what it looked like, and legend or lies, or truth or myths. And I think that's a great thing to look at, because of what your history and what you did behind the scenes.
Yes, and I'll tell you, Anthony, it wasn't an easy task. Not as easy as I thought it would be. It was a year's work and 12 credit hours that I really had to have to graduate. So now I know we're going back a few years, but you're never too old to learn, by the way. But saying that is that separation of church and state, and I'll go into more detail later on, and certainly the book does. But the main function of the defense against biblical and that wall of separation is from an early letter written to the Baptist Society to from Jefferson, by the way, stating that, hey, you don't have to worry. There's a wall of separation. We're never going to interfere with with your beliefs or try to deter your religion and force another religion onto you, such as England did, and Spain and others. So I think that was mistakenly, as Jefferson has really proved in his writings and in some of his acts, which he supported, some acts of Congress that I'll tell you about that were absolutely biblical. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But to bring this to a head, this point is that wall was really a wall of protection. He did not mean that there's no such religion or Christian belief or biblical beliefs that should be encountered into our laws, because our first laws were actually put together and established based on biblical principles. And Jefferson was right there with them. Whether he was a Bible believer or not, he certainly had a belief in God and respected religion, and found many times in his writings that it was the best. How can I say it? Maybe the best idea for Christianity in a legal pretense to govern this nation. Now, John Adams was a different story. He was quite open and clear about his biblical beliefs,
his intentions.
Oh yes, he certainly was. And and there was many others: Monroe, Madison, Samuel Adams. I mean, there was a lot that had great biblical statements in forming this Constitution. But getting back to the charters, when you go back and look at each of the 13 colonies, they all went through quite of a challenge. And I'll say a challenge because I don't know if we could have lived through some of the challenges they had with the Indians, with the climates, with crop failures. I mean, they had some great challenges way before establishing the Constitution. So getting back to the groundwork on them establishing the charters, they wanted the enjoyment of life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness and safety. And they state this many times. The Virginia Bill of Rights, one of the first charters that was made that governed the first colonies. I mean, it said it all by itself. I mean, and it took these biblical principles of Christianity and says, hey, this is how people should act. And if you don't, then there's a rule of law that's going to govern and deal with those issues, whether it be criminal or otherwise. So I thought that was pretty neat, as they even followed the religion to, apply it to law, both criminal and civil, to govern their country. And at that time, it was a very small colony starting out, but that was one of the first ones. And I could quote some of the things. I don't remember all of it from memory, but boy, some of the charters really quoted some biblical verses and statements of the Bible. So it was pretty uplifting to me to say, geez, this wasn't a biblical nation. We weren't founded on godly principles. God really wasn't part of this country. Well, anyways, to go on with that, that Virginia colony was kind of the first colony to start out. That's kind of the establishment colony, the New England. And they were the founders.
And I think what people don't realize is, okay, you hear like in the Pledge of Allegiance or the preamble, like, oh, God bless America, or anything like those, is there's little phrases put here and there throughout the Constitution.
Absolutely.
And people don't realize that, like, unless you read the Constitution, you're a lawyer or you're state legislator or anything that no matter where you go, it has a Bible feel to it.
It does. It has that intent. Now, of course, they're not using those words in the Constitution, obviously. So that's why I had to go back to the founding fathers and see what their intent was. In fact, I went back, as you know, in the 1400s to Christopher Columbus. But there's another one, that I keep forgetting about is that Mayflower Compact. When the Pilgrims came over here in the 1600s, early 1600s, 1620, I believe it was, they formed their Massachusetts, and that was where it was. It was Plymouth Rock in the Massachusetts area. And that Mayflower Compact was absolutely delegated to the glory of God. In fact, they quoted it for, and I believe it was like the glory of God in the advancement of the Christian faith. And that was their theme of law on the Pilgrim when they came into this country. So it's called the, Mayflower Compact. They made that on the way over here. How are we going to govern this small colony when we get there? And they formed that Mayflower Compact. And I thought that was amazing that I never saw that as a civil body politics, to be honest with you. And so they, again, brought in the presence of God in their development of their laws for the Pilgrims. So that, again, was amazing. So now we're going back from Columbus to the Pilgrims, to the first founders and the first 13
in your book, and I think people don't maybe not understand, is this is how what you talked about in your book. You talked about how they developed these documents to create and start or have the framework for the Constitution.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And I'm going to tell you, I was as surprised as probably a lot of readers of this book are also, because we weren't taught that in school. I want to tell you.
No, we weren't. We were talking about general. Here's the Constitution. This is what it says. But it was more of given to you in here a reading form, not an actual, like, here's what it actually says. Is there a really comma there, or is that like a period?
You got it. And believe me, in law, a period and a comma can make a difference. But
exactly. And I think, because I know we talked briefly that there was a lot of theories about how the Constitution was written, and you kind of wanted to change that. And you're kind of tired of hearing about the New Age and theories, so you wanted to kind of do something and really make it a great piece that, hey, here are the facts.
Exactly. I wanted to do away with the myth about, the Constitution. And so I wanted to bring it back to truth. And that's what this is all about. It's all based on facts. And by the way, you don't have to be a lawyer or a law scholar to find this information. Library of Congress, history books. There's a lot of information out there. If you spend the time to research it, you could find exactly what I'm quoting in this particular book. A lot of it.
Were you able to go to the Library of Congress itself?
Well, only virtually. I did that not because of the epidemic. This was way before that, but only because of research. So no, I didn't go there myself.
I can only imagine.
Oh, I would love to go there someday. I want to tell you, it is amazing on what they have. In fact, I got some of the documents because I wanted to see them myself. They actually were reproductions, and you have to pay for them from the Library of Congress. But you can get these. You can obtain these documents. And in fact, I did that for the Articles of Confederation because I wanted to see what the colonies were talking about as they quoted. This was in New Haven, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. They formed that Articles of Confederation, kind of the start of a collective group, kind of like the first start of the states joining together. So I wanted to see what they were talking about in this particular Articles of Confederation, and it was pretty neat because I was finding that they quoted the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ, and again to enjoy the liberties of the gospel, and the purities and peace and safety, and they talked about that in their development of the Articles of Confederation that governed those 3 or 4 states. They were colonies at that point, but they collectively governed themselves under these Articles of Confederation. And I thought that was pretty interesting too. So
let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, and this is just something that I've kind of, in your research, and maybe you didn't cover this area, but were you able to find any other documents from governments maybe across the world that you may have saw other phrases or stuff from the Bible or other things that they may have done like we did here in the United States? Just an off
Well,
question.
the Magna Carta was probably the closest because we kind of brought that into our the habeas corpus. We kind of brought that into
Mhm.
our Constitution. But no, I really just concentrated on the U.S. and how our governing parties established the Constitution. So
Do
I
you
really
think it was
didn't.
their intent? Do you think it was their intent when they were creating this document to bring God into the mixture?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. You know, some of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were actually bona fide ministers and ministers of the Bible. And it was interesting
Really?
to start. Yes, when I started studying that and researching that, and it was interesting. I was really surprised. And so they brought their religious beliefs from the Bible into the writings of their first, of course, of the charters. And it's very clear on the writings of the charters. You could read each charter and you will find reference to our Lord and Savior, God and the Ten Commandments and the governing laws of the Bible. I mean, it goes on and on. And some of them, a lot of them quoted the Old Testament, which is the Ten Commandments and so forth, for reference on how to handle the criminal law. On okay, if someone takes someone's cattle, then there's a consequence. If you kill a cattle, then you could lose your life. I mean, it was
It was
ironic.
weird back then. It was
Yes.
a little bit different. Well, let me ask you this, and this is something I looked up, and in the early Supreme Court decisions, okay,
Yeah.
for example, in 18, I don't know, I think this was no, basically Holy Trinity Church versus United States.
Oh
The
yes.
Supreme Court declared numerous times in that decision that that they clearly stated that Christianity was the true intent of government rule for the nation.
Yes. And if
Talk
you read,
talk a
if
little bit
you,
about that real quick,
yeah,
because I found it interesting.
and that was interesting, and we didn't really get into the deep depths of what that decision was in law school, which really surprised me because I think that has a great influence on not only the law then on the separation of church and state, but even today, how they outright state that there is no way that we are really a Christian nation. We're just a nation of all religions and whatever. And that's not true. 87 times in that particular decision, Supreme Court decision, they mention biblical truths, reference to God, reference to the governing body of Christianity, and the founding fathers. They even quoted some of the same statements that the founding fathers stated in the decision. So I was really happy about that. So it was kind of neat. And yes, there was other decisions later on that overturned that. But ironically, the older cases of law all supported Christianity in the Constitution. In fact, not only did they support it, they ruled in favor of it. And I can go on and on about that particular
And
case
and
because I
we
found
talk about separation, and we talk about separation of religion and state. And you have the Supreme Court making decisions at that time on those types of scenarios.
exactly, and in favor of Christianity. In fact, it's even stated in there clearly, and I quoted in the book that that we are clearly a Christian nation
Hmm.
and founded on Christian principles. And I was astonished to read that because that's not what today's society
No,
is
today
believing.
is totally different. Today is we don't get in the mix. We don't touch Christianity and politics. We don't touch this and this. And I think what people in history can tell us something about our history, as people might say, we're only 200 or 300 years old. We're not that old as a nation compared to
No,
some people across the world.
absolutely. We're still a very, very young nation. But on that same point, this is interesting. In 1690, the first publications for educational purposes was the New England Primer, and that New England Primer was a textbook, by the way, for schools, developed by the settlers, and it had all kinds of biblical meanings and definitions in it. I mean, it was, and by the way, um, I even got a copy of a replica, but I got a copy of that in New England Primer. It was really neat. It had children's prayers in it, like "Now I lay me down to sleep." It had reference to A, B, C, D. Well, every one of those had a Bible verse next to A, B, C. I mean, it was like, seriously, this was a textbook for the colonies to use, sanctioned by the colonies, governing their laws for education. I was totally surprised about that. So, and that was back in the 1690s. So, it's amazing how the founders were really thinking. And if they were thinking that way back then, well, my goodness, how did we get so far away from Christianity in schools today? Like in the 60s, where they took prayer from school. I mean, horrible. But
Well, do
I'm
you
just
think?
reiterating that a little bit because I wanted to share that how the founding fathers even used that textbook. And by the way, all those founders read that textbook as a student growing up. So it's kind of interesting.
I mean, I can only imagine what was going on back in the late 16, early 1700s. Just kind of creating what was going on. I mean, you had Jefferson, you had Adams, you had Washington, and just the general principles of Christianity.
Absolutely. And I think our founding fathers would be turning in their graves today to see the great fight against Christianity. I mean, the media today is even silencing, and even government is trying to silence Christianity. The First Amendment is the most powerful amendment in the Bill of Rights that we have. Not only do we have free speech and freedom of press, and I agree, the press absolutely should have the freedom, to speak, but they should speak truth and not make opinions. My opinion is the Constitution gives them the right under the First Amendment to speak, and I agree. And if they have something to say, they should say it. But if it violates the rights of others, if it infringes on the rights of freedom of religion, or the freedom of us to assemble peacefully, then I'm sorry, I have a real problem with that. And I think the courts are going to have to rule on this sooner or later. So that's just my humble opinion on moving forward. But going back to the 1400s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, you can just follow the pattern and sequence and find that all of that was true until we start getting into the 1900s. And then obviously, although we should have the majority rules, the minority had a right to make a complaint. That complaint went to the Supreme Court, and prayer was taken out of schools. Bibles were thrown out. You couldn't have a Bible in school. So I guess I have a real problem with that today, knowing how the founders really established the country. That was not their intent.
But it's okay to have a Bible in every hotel room in the country if it has a drawer.
Yeah, good for the Gideons. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. So once you researched your book and you finished it, what was your biggest thing that you learned out of your whole entire book? Because I think like you go into doing something like a big project like this, doing one thing, like, hey, I want to get rid of the myths and do it right and get the facts. But then on a project like that, you always learn something else that you never learned, that you thought, you know what, that was a great opportunity. I learned that. What was that, if there was one?
Well, there was a number of them, Anthony. I want to tell you, starting with the founding fathers and some of the first charters. I never read even the charter from Pennsylvania. I'm in Missouri now. I never read any of the first charters. Pennsylvania was one of the leading, states or colonies at that time. So reading all of the charters, Virginia, and Connecticut, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, the first start of the main charters, the New England colonies is what they're called. The first start of all that, and read how they formed their government, was a big surprise to me, because that separation of church and state was always in my mind. That, oh yeah, they always had that separation of church and state. That was a given in law school. No, that is absolutely a myth. It's not. And so if I had to bring it all into one, I guess that establishment clause is the biggest item that I learned, and probably the most influential on the writings of the founding fathers that established that clause. So, and I want to make another comment too, which is important, because they were saying that, well, the founders, they believed in God, but they really weren't biblical. But in the Continental Congress, in I think it was somewhere in 76, but even maybe after that, and I can't remember the exact date. Jefferson and Adams, they were on a committee to establish Bibles as the textbooks for the states, and that every state and every educational program should have and be teaching the Bible. Now, that was absolutely bizarre to me. In fact, as an act of Congress in 1791, Benjamin Rush, and if you remember Benjamin Rush, he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And anyways, he was proposing that the Bible kind of be a textbook. And Jefferson Adams says, yeah, let's have an act of Congress, and we will absolutely fund that. We will fund Bibles for, all of the states. And that was amazing. Well, wait a minute. There's supposed to be separation of church and state. The charters, all the charters reference God in them, and biblical principles, 10 Commandments. I mean, it was on and on. And now we have an act of Congress to actually produce Bibles through a publishing company for the schools. It's like, really? Unbelievable.
And I don't think people don't realize that. I mean,
No.
And nowadays you would think that even if you mention Christianity on the Senate floor, or you'd get penalized for that in some short way, which you should never get penalized, because it's your belief. If you're a Protestant, you're a Protestant.
Right.
If you're a Catholic, you're Catholic. I mean, I'm Catholic, and
Sure.
and you're Catholic as well. And I think that people need to understand, respect what your religion is. Now,
Yes.
your religion is, you can use it in whatever capacity, morals, ethical, whatever that is. But at the same time, at the end of the day, all those religions are with the same person in some capacity.
Amen. That's right. That's exactly right. And they all reference God.
Exactly.
And
No matter
so,
in different versions, but all
right.
mention one God. The
You got it.
same word God. And I think nowadays we're getting off to that point where it just makes a huge I mean it's all referenced some different way.
Well, sure. They want to take God out of the Pledge of Allegiance. I mean, come on. I mean,
Yeah.
any reference to God, they want to destroy. And it's funny that even back in and I don't remember the exact dates, but it was in the 1700s, the formation of Harvard University. I mean, their rules and precepts adopted biblical principles. I mean, it was like, seriously?
and you look at it this way, and it's one of those things that's like, you look at heaven, Jesus to God. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
that's where you're going through Jesus.
Yeah.
And I don't think people, and I don't like, I don't want to get into religious who believes in what. That's, you believe your own thing. I respect that. That's but I think showing how Christianity changed the way that our colonies did stuff when they first started.
Exactly. I mean, I don't remember the exact quote from Harvard Law School, but it was their university statement, and it was something on the basis to consider life and studies to know God in Jesus Christ, which is eternal. And I don't know all of it, but there was a couple sentences that referenced, I think it was John 17:3 in the Bible. And it was like, seriously, and now Harvard is teaching just the opposite, but they have truth in Christ and church above their auditorium, or I can't remember if it's the auditorium, but it's definitely on their campus. It's their original seal, and it's on their seal, and it says "Truth for Christ and the Church" right on their seal. Now,
But it's
that's
but
going
it's
back to the
funny,
1700s.
if you want to go even back further, is what is the biggest thing that every person in the world or the United States uses, that no matter what religion you are, what do they use that the government produces? There's just a fun fact for you.
Oh, tell me about this. Oh,
So
I know what they do, taking God's name in vain, but
no, no,
go
so
ahead.
everyone in the United States, or pretty much anyone, access to the American dollar. What's on the back of the American dollar? God
In
we
God we
trust.
trust. You got it. And on our
So
coins.
exactly. So those are and no matter who you are, no matter if your religion differs from everyone else, we still use the same money that's a sponsor of the U.S. government, United States government, and it's still on there after all these years.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, well, I appreciate you taking time. I know you're a busy man, and I appreciate you talking about your book. But I think you did a great thing here, and I wish everyone would have the opportunity to read it, and have the opportunity. Here it is again, constitutional law. Where are you able to get this book?
Oh, at any of the books and Noble or Barnes and Noble and Amazon and all of your bookstores could get it or order it for anyone. But Amazon and Barnes and Noble are about the easiest to get, even online.
The United States Constitution, Legend or Lies, Truth or Myths. Hope you have a chance to read it, because I know it's an intriguing book.
Well, thank you, Anthony. I appreciate
I,
the interview. Look forward to
I
talking to you
appreciate,
in the future.
yeah, I appreciate you taking time. We'll have to talk more about. I enjoy a big history. I'm a big history buff myself, so I appreciate you taking time and everything like that. And at the end of my interviews, I like to ask my fun questions. Are you interested in little fun?
Sure.
So, okay, so any of the answers can be personal or professional. There's no right or wrong answer. Okay. Best experience.
Best experience? Well,
Mm-hmm.
definitely in law school, it was graduating summa cum laude.
Can only imagine. Okay. What's
Hey,
your
being a
what's your
lawyer, what can I tell you?
yeah, yeah, you're a lawyer. They like to charge me by the hour.
Yeah.
What's your best accomplishment?
Well, besides marrying and having wonderful children and grandchildren, accepting the Lord Jesus Christ was probably the biggest step in my personal life. And then writing this book was definitely a rewarding process. Worth all the time and energy to do it was well worth it.
And sleepless nights.
Oh yes, many.
Best memory.
Actually, of all of our family growing up,
Okay.
including all of our cousins and relatives and nieces and nephews, it is really
Understood.
nice to reminisce that. And I hope to do that again when I retire and enjoy all the time with everyone again.
Well, you're in
Looking
Kansas
forward to
City,
it.
so you're in Kansas City, so one day I hope you do retire.
I'm planning on it soon.
Who's your role model?
Abraham Lincoln.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. So this question may either tap onto that or there will be a new answer to this. If you could meet one person, past or present, who would it be and why?
Well, it'd probably be a draw up between Washington and Lincoln. I think both of those guys were men of principle and men of Christianity. I can't tell you how many times Washington was quoted praying for his men at Valley Forge. And he even says only through divine providence did he win that battle. And I believe that to be true. And I just love his governing thoughts. And Lincoln, he's just an amazing lawyer, which I really like. And the rights of freedom for all. And, there's a lot of controversy about, freedom of slavery and so forth that Lincoln passed. And there's speculation that that's why he was killed. But I just was inspired by his beliefs and his faith in so many challenges, the same as Washington. Different challenges, more modern challenges did Lincoln have, even with his own political, race. But it was a tough battle for him. And he stood strong in the faith, strong in his beliefs and principles. And he led this country to an unbelievable victory.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know everyone buy the book, read the book. It's a good history lesson on where our country started and where hopefully it'll go moving forward.
Well, thank you, Anthony.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for watching. If you'd like to watch more interviews, announcements, or podcasts, you can go to anthonyvspano.com. Everyone, good night, stay safe, and God